Welcome to a deep dive into the Teapot Dome scandal. It's this crazy story from 1920s America, where oil was like the new gold, and everyone wanted in on it, even if it meant doing some seriously shady stuff. We're talking about corruption that went all the way to the top. Secret deals, courtroom drama, a millionaire going to jail.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this scandal
Yeah.
is that it's not just about greed.
Yeah.
It really shows you just how much power was at stake.
Mm-hmm.
During the oil boom, whoever controlled the oil, well, they controlled the future.
Yeah.
And people were willing to do just about anything to get a piece of that.
Exactly. And the sources you found for this deep dive, court transcripts, investigative reports, there's even stuff about attempts to get Hollywood involved. It's like something straight out of a movie.
It really is.
But, okay, before we get too deep into it, let's just set the stage. Our main players are Albert Fall. He was Secretary of the Interior. And he's kind of at the center of this whole mess. Then we've got Harry Sinclair, who ran Mammoth Oil Company, and Edward Doheny, the head of Pan American Petroleum and Transport Company. These guys were big shots, used to getting their way, and they all had their eyes on one thing, the Teapot Dome Oil Reserve in Wyoming.
And Teapot Dome, it wasn't just any oil field. This was a big one, hugely important, controlled by the U.S. Navy.
The Navy? What
Yeah.
did they want with oil?
Well, back then, oil was becoming the most important thing for the military.
Oh, I see.
Control the oil and you control the seas. So when Fall leased Teapot Dome to Sinclair and other reserves to Doheny, all in secret, no bidding or anything, people started to get suspicious.
Yeah, I can see why. I mean, we're talking about public resources handed over in secret deals. That's asking for trouble. So who finally exposed all of this?
That would be Senator Thomas Walsh, a guy known for being honest and not giving up. He spent years putting the pieces together, facing roadblocks and dodging evasions from some very powerful people.
Well, it makes you wonder. If everything was on the up and up, why all the secrecy? Why try to hide things? Sinclair especially. He seemed to go out of his way to be difficult during those Senate hearings.
He was defiant, completely, refused to answer any questions, said the Senate had no power over him.
What?
Can you believe that?
Oh.
He thought he was above the law because of his money and power. Of course, this just made Senator Walsh even more determined to get to the bottom of it. He saw it as a straight-up attempt to obstruct justice.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
And Walsh wasn't going to let him get away with it, right?
Not a chance. He went after Sinclair with a contempt of Congress charge. This is a big deal, and it really changed how the public saw the scandal. It showed that no one, not even these rich oil guys, was above the law, and that the Senate was serious about getting the truth.
So that was a turning point. So after that contempt charge, what happened? Did they just keep going after Sinclair? Or did Doheny and Fall get pulled into it too?
Well, it became much bigger than just Sinclair.
Mm-hmm.
They started filing civil lawsuits
Wow.
to try to get those oil reserves back for the government. The argument was that the leases were, well, basically stolen
Mm-hmm.
from the American people. And then things get interesting because on one hand, you've got these legal battles going on, and on the other hand, you've got Doheny trying to make himself look good by getting Hollywood to tell his side of the story.
So we've got these two things happening at the same time, the legal battles, and Doheny trying to spin the story his way using Hollywood. It's wild. What was he thinking? What was he hoping to get out of that?
Well, put yourself in Doheny's shoes. You've built this whole empire. You're respected. And suddenly you're caught up in this huge scandal. Well, all over the news. You'd want to protect yourself from it.
Yeah.
So his idea was to control the story, to make himself look like the victim, a good guy who just got misunderstood.
So he went to Cecil B. DeMille, who was the biggest director in Hollywood back then, hoping to make this blockbuster movie about himself. It's almost funny when you think about it, this serious scandal. And he's trying to turn it into a Hollywood movie. Did DeMille even consider it? I mean...
It seems like he was interested at first. I mean, Doheny was a big personality, and his story had everything a good movie needs. Ambition, betrayal, power struggles. But Doheny had one condition. He wanted to control everything. He wanted to make sure the movie told his version of the story. He even promised DeMille all this secret information, the real truth about Teapot Dome, he called it. But only if DeMille signed a contract, giving Doheny control over the script.
That's crazy. He wasn't interested in the truth at all. Just making himself look good. What did DeMille think about that?
Well, DeMille was a smart guy, and he knew this was a risky move. The scandal was still going on. People wanted to know what really happened. And a fake version of the story, written by Doheny himself, probably wouldn't go over well. Plus, think about the legal stuff. Getting involved in something this political could have been bad for DeMille's career. So he turned Doheny down. He realized it was just too dangerous.
It's interesting. That whole thing with DeMille, it really shows you what kind of guy Doheny was. He wasn't just fighting the legal battles, he wanted to control the whole story. But okay, back to those legal battles. What happened with the civil lawsuits? Did the government get those oil reserves back?
Well, it was complicated. Some wins, some losses. In Doheny's case, the judge ruled against him, said that the loan he gave Fall was actually a bribe. It was a big win for the government. But the fight wasn't over yet. Sinclair, though, he actually won his case in Wyoming. The judge said he could keep drilling at Teapot Dome.
Wait, so Sinclair won even after they found out Doheny bribed Fall. How does that make sense?
You got to remember, these were separate trials, different judges, different lawyers. Sinclair's lawyers, they said his lease was legit, that he got it fair and square, and that what Doheny did didn't have anything to do with his case. And the judge in Wyoming, for some reason, he agreed. It was a big setback for Senator Walsh and his team. But they weren't giving up. They knew they had to keep fighting until all the oil reserves were back in public hands.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. Sinclair won in Wyoming. But the stuff you found, it shows he wasn't exactly an angel. In fact, he did some pretty desperate things to try to win the criminal trials that were coming up.
Oh, yeah, he did. Sinclair was in big trouble. He knew if he was found guilty, it could be the end for him. So he did what any rich guy who doesn't care about the rules would do. He tried to ring the jury.
Jury tampering? That's bold. Even for Sinclair, how did he even do that?
Sinclair was good at getting people to do what he wanted, and he had a lot of people working for him. So he hired this team to look into the people who might be on the jury, digging up dirt on them, finding their weaknesses, anything he could use against them, like if they needed money or if they had problems in their personal life.
That's just creepy. These were just normal people trying to do their civic duty, and Sinclair was trying to buy them off. Did he actually manage to bribe any jurors?
Unfortunately, yeah, he did. And one of those jurors, he got a little cocky. Started bragging about his new money at a soda fountain, of all places. Didn't realize there was a reporter sitting right there listening to everything.
You're kidding. So he got caught because he couldn't keep his mouth shut.
Pretty much. The reporter wrote a story about it, and the whole thing blew up. People were furious. Here was this guy, already suspected of corruption, now caught trying to cheat the justice system. It was a disaster for Sinclair. And in the end, he was found guilty of jury tampering.
So even though he didn't get convicted for the oil stuff, he got caught trying to mess with the system. What happened to him? Did he go to jail for that?
He did. 6 months.
6 months, that's all. For trying to rig a trial.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like much, does it? But back then, it was different. Rich and powerful people, they often got special treatment. The justice system wasn't always fair.
That's kind of depressing. But, okay, what about Sinclair's time in prison? Was it tough on him? Or did he still live like a king?
Well, that's the crazy part. You'd think a guy like Sinclair, used to the best of everything, would hate prison. And he was scared at first. But it wasn't that bad for him.
Really? He got off easy. Again.
It's strange.
Right.
But a few things helped him out. First, the prison he went to, it wasn't a high security place. It was more like minimum security. And then being famous actually helped him. The warden, he liked having a celebrity in his prison.
So they treated him like a VIP. This is unbelievable.
It shows you how messed up the system was. Regular people were crammed into tiny cells. But Sinclair, he got special treatment, had his own cell, got to work in the pharmacy, even got extra privileges because of his connections outside.
Money talks, huh? Even in prison. It just shows that justice isn't always blind. But what about Fall? What happened to him? He was the one who made those deals in the first place.
Fall's story is different. While Sinclair was scheming, Fall was facing the music. His health was bad, and the scandal was really getting to him. He knew he was probably going to jail, and the thought of spending his last years locked up is a lot to handle.
It's like something out of a Shakespeare play. Sinclair, the guy who always gets what he wants, gets away with it. And Fall, the guy who might have actually thought he was doing the right thing, ends up ruined.
It is a classic story about pride and falling from grace. But we're not done yet. The trials that would decide their fate, they were still to come. And those trials, they would bring new secrets, big courtroom fights, and a verdict that would shock the whole country.
So Sinclair's in this cushy prison, right? For jury tampering. And Fall, he's falling apart. Health failing. Reputation shot. It feels like the end is near. So what happened in the trials? Did they actually get justice?
Those trials, man, they were complicated. Legal stuff, courtroom drama, the whole 9 yards. But one thing really stands out. The testimony of Ben Everhart, Fall's son-in-law.
Oh, wow.
He didn't want to testify. Torn between family and the truth.
Yeah, tough spot.
But on the stand, he spilled it. Told everything about the money going from Sinclair to Fall.
Yeah.
Confirmed the bribe.
Fall's own son-in-law brought him down. That's gotta hurt. Did they finally nail Sinclair with that?
You'd think so, right?
Mm-hmm.
All that evidence, but Sinclair, he got off. Acquitted on the bribery charge.
Seriously?
The judge made this ruling really controversial. Didn't allow some of the evidence. Basically, the prosecution couldn't make their case. It was a huge win for Sinclair and a big loss for everyone who wanted to see him pay for what he did.
Man, that's crazy. After all that, the secret deals, the jury tampering, he walks away. Doesn't feel right.
It really makes you think about how much money and power matter in the legal system. Remember, Sinclair had the best lawyers. Tons of money to fight this. But even though he wasn't convicted, everyone knew what he was. Not a successful businessman, but a crook, willing to do whatever it took to protect himself.
Yeah, public opinion, that's a powerful thing, even if the courts don't get it right. Okay, but what about Fall? Did he get away with it too?
Not a chance. He didn't have Sinclair's money or fancy lawyers. And the evidence against him, including his son-in-law's testimony, it was too much. The jury found him guilty. Bribery. He became the first cabinet member in U.S. history to be convicted of a felony while in office.
So, in the end, Fall was the one who took the fall. Ironic, right? For a guy who was so powerful. What was the sentence?
1 year in prison. A $100,000 fine. But it was more than that. He was ruined. Reputation destroyed. His health got even worse. He spent his last years as a warning about what happens when power and greed take over.
Yeah, actions have consequences, no matter who you are. But hold on, what about Doheny? He was in on the bribery too, right? Did anything happen to him?
That's the weird part. Fall went to prison for taking a bribe from Doheny. But Doheny, he was acquitted in his own bribery trial. I know, it's hard to understand. Basically, they couldn't prove for sure that Doheny knew he was bribing Fall.
So Fall goes to jail, and Doheny goes free. Man, that's messed up.
Yeah, bribery is hard to prove, especially when you're dealing with guys like Doheny. They know how to hide things. But even though he wasn't convicted, Doheny's reputation was shot. People knew what he'd done, and it affected his whole life. His son, Ned, he ended up dying in a murder-suicide. People think it was because of the stress from the scandal. It shows that corruption, it doesn't just affect the people involved, it hurts families too.
This has been, well, it's been a wild ride. Ambition, greed, betrayal, the fight for justice. We've seen how power can corrupt people, and how hard it is to speak truth to power. What are your final thoughts on all this? What can we learn from Teapot Dome, even now, almost 100 years later?
Teapot Dome shows us just how important it is to keep things open and honest. We need a free press, judges who aren't afraid to stand up to power. And we got to keep fighting for justice every day, because there are always going to be people trying to take advantage for their own gain.
Well said. And you know, this scandal, it's not just history. We're still dealing with these same problems today. Corporate influence, dirty politicians, leaders who can't be trusted. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive. Teapot Dome, it reminds us that democracy is fragile and that we got to keep holding those in power accountable